In this section, we're going to look at this critical concept of crawling and indexing. And this section consists of a couple different parts. The main takeaway, though, is we've looked at individual pages, like what does a search engine result page look like? What are different types of search intent? Answering those kinds of questions. And now we want to dig into how do pages actually end up where they can be displayed in search engine result pages. Can all pages be, or do they have to have some kind of attribute? And we're going to cover that. So we'll answer this question, how do pages show up in search results? Then we'll dig into what is a cached page. So for those pages that actually are part of a search engine index, what can we know about them? We'll take a look at that concept, cached pages. And then we'll answer this critical question, which is, how do we control what the search engines actually see on our site? Are there relevant things we can do to either block the crawler or that might be inadvertently blocking the crawler from pages that are important to us? So we're going to say, how do we control the crawler? And we're going to look at this concept called robots.txt. So let's answer this question. How do pages show up in search results? That is, we get search results. Why do some pages show up in those search results and others don't? It's good to start with this concept when discussing this topic of crawling and indexing. Look, the search engine's job is to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible and useful. Now, the current way that people access the search engine databases is through either typing words or saying words. So what the search engine's trying to do is trying to make information accessible through the words that people use to describe their intent. So if we think about the process by which they do that, we could say that search engines really have these kind of two functions, right? They're out there trying to find the value on web pages, oftentimes in whatever content, whether or not it's images or videos or text. So they're trying to find that information. And then they need to deliver it to people in some way that matches the search intent with the words that have been used. So if we kind of break this into a little bit more proper search engine optimization terminology, we'd say the finding part is called crawling and indexing. Right? Search engines are going out and trying to find content. And then the delivery of it is them ranking it and displaying it in a search engine result page. So let's really focus our efforts here on understanding this crawling and indexing process. So the often used analogy for crawling and indexing is looking at like a subway system or a road map. Okay, and in this we can imagine that in a subway system or a train network, that all of the stations in the this network represent pages. Okay, so web pages, and between all of these different pages are links. So the train track themselves would be considered links in this analogy. And so what the search engine does, the way that it crawls sites, the term crawling and spidering are used synonymously for the most part for this discussion, is that they start at some known valuable site, or this is a conceptual way of imagining this. They start at some known valuable site, right? So Wikipedia, for example. And then Wikipedia has all these links to other sites. So the search engine will read all the Wikipedia pages, and wherever it links out to other pages, it'll then go through those links. So it'll crawl through those links to those other pages, read those pages, find any links, crawl to the others, etc. So this is the process of crawling, where the search engines are looking to find all of the valuable pages across the internet and save them somewhere. And what they're doing is they're storing them in an easy to retrieve format. So they want to be able to say that when I search for corgi puppies, that it's going to be able to correctly identify pages that are about corgis, about corgi puppies, and depending upon what search intent I display, rapidly find the pages that meet those criteria. So the way that they store it is they store it in these data storage centers, right? And we would call this the index. So it has crawled pages and then it indexes them in the storage center. The important thing to think about here is that if your pages have not been crawled and have not been indexed by the search engine, then they're not going to show up in the search engine result pages. And this can be one of the major issues facing a site. Why am I not showing up in ranks? Well, the first question is, are my pages even in the index? Are they even able to be displayed regardless of what the quality of the content is on that? So crawling errors and things that are associated with crawling and indexing can be a major problem for a site if you're not appropriately indexed. Let's talk about cached pages and how they relate to indexation, as well as some of the things that we can derive from search operators. So when a page or site is crawled by a search engine, the page attributes are recorded and indexed. So here we have an example of a page, and when the search engine crawls this page, it's going to record things like the page title, and it's going to look at the images, maybe follow through different internal and external links and H tags, etc. But it's also going to look at a ton of other attributes associated with that page, including things like how fast did it load, some sense of whether or not it has any security certification, are there social buttons, how easy is it to read, text size, etc. This is often said to be 200 or more ranking signals that are collected by the search engine when indexing a page. So all of that is stored in a storage center, and we would call that the index for the search engine. Well, what can we know about the indexed pages that the search engine has about our site or our customer site? Well, we can get a sense of what pages are in the index for a site by using this search operator. We're going to look at a couple search operators here. The first one is going to be site colon. So if you use site colon with no space and then your website, what you'll get is you'll get all of the results that the search engine has for that site, or at least close to it. It's directional in nature. It's not going to be 100% accurate, but it's going to be directional in nature. It should be somewhere close to the number. So here we can see that when we do the Moz.com site and say site colon Moz.com, put that in the search engine, we've now instructed the search engine to just show us pages that it has on the site. And so we can see this number here, 45,900. That would represent how many pages meet this criteria that are in the index. This is not the same as saying how many pages are actually on the Moz.com site. This is just the number of pages that the search engine has in its index. This might be a number that is smaller than the total number of pages, or it might be a number that is bigger than the total number of pages. And both of those would be things that we want to try to understand why that's the case. These pages that it has in the index are referred to as cached pages. So let's look at an example of what a cached page is. We can see any given page for its cached version. So imagine that you have a blog or a page on a website. In this case, it's a Wikipedia page. And that page has been changed. So you update the picture or you update the text on the page. Just because you update the page on your site doesn't mean that the search engine has updated that same page in its index. If it hasn't crawled the site recently, it will not display the information associated with that new updated page. So if we want to see what is the cached version, that is, show me the page that you have in your index versus the one that is maybe live, how do I see that? Well, we can use this example here with a Wikipedia page. So let's go ahead and take this URL for this Wikipedia page, and then we're going to add the search operator cache colon, and then the URL. When I add the search operator cache colon and a URL after it, what that delivers me is this version. So you'll see that there is a little bar across or a little tray across the top of the page now. This says this is Google's cached version of the URL, snapshot of the page as it appeared with the date and time when it was crawled, current page, etc., etc. And then you can see these 3 items underneath it: full version, text-only version, or view source. So in this case, full version is bolded. That means we are viewing the full version, although we could look at the text-only version or view source. So the important thing to think about with these 3 options is that when a search engine crawls your page, it does not render it in a browser, at least not on mobile, or with mobile this might be different. However, often with desktop, it is not rendering it in a browser. It's just reading the code. So when we want to actually see what the version of the page that the search engine sees, quote unquote, when it crawls the page, we'd want to look at this. We'd want to look at the view source. Okay, and what this is going to show us is it's going to show us this. This is the code of the page, and it's just showing us how the search engine would view that. So the important thing to think about here, and you'll often hear this in discussions, is that because it's not being loaded in a browser, it may not show things like JavaScript. So if you have JavaScript on your site, the cached version, or what's being recorded by the search engine, may not include things that are enabled by JavaScript. It's important to understand robots.txt when trying to diagnose any crawl issues, and also when using it to control how crawlers see your sites. So let's ask this question. So when a site is indexed by a search engine, is there any way that we can provide instructions for what pages to crawl and what not to crawl? Let's say that we have either portions of the site that don't have a lot of value, or we have the alternative where we have pages that we absolutely want to make sure show up in the index. How can we do that? Well, we can do that with robots.txt. Robots.txt are instructions for a web crawler because when web crawlers hit a site, the first thing that they're going to go do is read the sitemaps, and they're going to read the robots.txt file. So you can kind of see here in this graphic that if we have this sitemap, as soon as the search engine hits a site, first thing it's going to do is go read the robots.txt. Let's take a look at that. So here is the Moz robots.txt file. You can see in the address bar that it is simply moz.com/robots.txt. If you go to pretty much any website, you can put in that /robots.txt and view their instructions for the crawler. It can be kind of insightful. The syntax for robots.txt is similar across pretty much every file that you're going to see. However, the degree to which people have this filled out may or may not be the same. Let's look at that syntax. So here's how you would fill out the robots.txt. There is this line that says user agent. So the user agent refers to the web crawler. So the user agent would be that crawler. In this case, we're looking at the Googlebot image crawler. Oftentimes you will see user agent and there'll be a star. And the star represents for this discussion a wildcard. So it says all user agents, all crawlers follow these instructions, or the following instructions that come after that. So here we say user agent is the first line, and then beneath that is a series of allow and disallow files. So you can see the star there. The star represents, again, a placeholder. And in this case, we'd say do not crawl. So you are not allowed to index anything that is in the /checkout folder. And so you'll see some robots.txt files are quite prolific. They'll have a lot of things called out, and some will just have nothing called out. So this is a normal syntax for robots.txt files. It'll be a user agent. It'll define that user agent, and then it'll be, here are things I either want you to stay out of or make sure that you crawl. Let's look at the Nike robots.txt. They kind of have an interesting thing. If you scroll all the way down to the bottom of the Nike's robots.txt file, you'll see actually a swoosh, which is kind of cool. But it's good. It's a good example because what we see here is we see quite a few instructions for different user agents. So there at the top, we see user agent star. That means all web crawlers follow these instructions that are that come right after that. We see a couple of allow files and some disallow files. Then you'll see that there's specific instructions for Googlebot, specific instructions for Googlebot image, and then specific instructions for the Baidu spider, right? So each one of the search engines or different elements of the search engines have their own instructions. And in this case, you can see, for example, the Baidu spider has disallows applied to all of its different language folders. So all it's doing is saying you're allowed to go through what appears to be the Chinese language. However, all these other languages, just ignore those, don't index them. They're going to be of very little value to you, right? And that makes sense. If you have primarily Chinese-speaking populations or searchers, then it's going to be really not worth the effort to go and index all of the site pages that are in different languages or for different audiences. So you can see here that you have a lot of flexibility with robots.txt. However, you do want to make sure that it's configured correctly. So for example, what if you inadvertently block a major portion of your site on robots.txt, or if you put in a disallow designation in robots.txt that refers to a folder structure where all of your images are held. So you can imagine that there could be some pretty simple errors that take place with robots.txt files, but also a lot of opportunity. This section will talk about algorithms and give you a cursory understanding of some of the common algorithms that you're going to encounter, as well as a brief history of how those algorithms came to be. So the sections we're going to talk about here, a little history of the Google search algorithms, some terms you may or may not be familiar with, as well as some recent trends in SEO. That is, how have the recent algorithm updates changed the way that search engine results are being displayed, and what are some of those opportunities? So let's go ahead and dig into that. In this lesson, let's talk about the search engine algorithms that you're most likely to encounter and have to deal with when updated. So there's always adjustments going on behind the scenes with improvements and little feature updates around the way that search engine results are displayed, including major algorithm updates. So here you can see just between, 2000 and 2013, there's all kinds of innovation that takes place. Let's discuss the main algorithm updates, though, that you should be familiar with. So in 2010, there was a major improvement to the Google search algorithm. This was the major rewrite of the algorithm called caffeine. So caffeine, in large part, was based on the freshness of articles. So you can imagine news sites that had breaking news and they had new pages on their sites. How does the newness or the freshness of those articles contend against articles that had been around a long time that might have a lot more links to them, right? You can imagine that the importance of that and the value of that page might not surface if you're working off of only inbound links. So a big problem, and caffeine was developed to solve that. However, because of this radical reshuffling of the results, caffeine required a series of patches. So let's look at some of those patches and those updates as they came out. In 2011, there was an update that was called Panda. Now these algorithms, or these patches to the algorithm, continue today. So you'll see that Panda updates continually occur. And Panda is really about identifying quality of pages. So the importance of inbound links, for example, and trying to degrade content that's considered thin content. How do we identify thin content? How do we make sure that doesn't make it into the index or that it doesn't show up in search result pages? That's very Panda. So 2011, Panda came out. In 2012, an update was called Penguin, and Penguin is always being updated still. This is about identifying spam. How can we identify and reduce spam in search result pages? It also did something interesting where it could identify spam on individual pages rather than penalize or ignore entire sites that had a component of them that were spammy. So a little bit more targeted in terms of spam identification and reducing the incidence of spam in the results. And then in 2013 represented the next major rewrite of the Google algorithm, and this was called Hummingbird. We really live now in the world of Hummingbird. And the most important aspect of Hummingbird to understand is that Hummingbird is based on understanding entities of queries and the relationship between words. So it isn't just about typing in words to a search engine and having the search engine try to find pages that have those words on them. Hummingbird really changed the way that search engines understand the relationship between those words by, for example, reading pages and seeing how often word pairs show up or how often words show up in the same kind of article. When it's displaying results, it's displaying the results and trying to understand those results more like the way a human might, where we could say, for example, if you talk about an NFL quarterback is on a team, and that NFL quarterback went to a school and it had a position on the team at that school, and they have a coach. All of those different entities or concepts, Hummingbird tries to understand and turn them into semantic topic areas and understand things contextually that way. So a very interesting update that happened in 2013. Another pretty significant update as well was in 2016, and that one was called Possum. Now, Possum specifically relates to local results, that is, results that display map packs. And what it does is it helps understand and bring into the ranking factors, the location of the searcher. So where are you when you're conducting the search? This radically changed the way that the search results for local results are displayed. So, for example, if I am looking for a sandwich, right, and I say sandwich shop, and I'm on my mobile phone, and I'm on one side of town versus the other, the results that are near me are going to be different. And so in that sense, the competition increased amongst different businesses. Maybe I'm the best sandwich shop in Chicago, but I'm far from you when you run the query. So even though in the previous world, prior to Possum, I might be considered the best and therefore show up number one, because I'm not close to you post Possum, maybe I'm not as high in the ranks in terms of those local pack results. So quite a significant change. Possum really changed the game when it came to local results. So those are some of the updates that are salient. I hope you found that helpful. Let's now discuss some of the recent trends in search engine optimization based upon what we know about the latest algorithms, as well as search intent and how the algorithm is trying to satisfy it. So in 2013, the algorithm Hummingbird was launched by Google, which looks beyond just individual words and rather looks at the entities associated with those words. That is, it looks for relationships between concepts and tries to understand the words that you use the way that another human might. So it's not just identifying the incidence of the words you're using on a given page. It's trying to understand what it is you're actually looking for and provide a result that matches that value as closely as possible. In a world where we are querying a search engine that has that kind of capability, we have to ask ourselves, what are some of the impacts? What are some of the behaviors and features that we see that are either enabled or developed on account of this? One of the things that's really interesting is that as the search engines have become smarter, the way that we interact with them has changed. One of those ways is that query length has gotten a lot longer. So we start seeing, instead of just word jumbles or short words such as men's shoes, we'd see something more like, what kinds of shoes should I wear to a cocktail party? Or what kinds of shoes are comfortable and formal and waterproof? Where those are the kinds of things that you're going to ask to another human rather than necessarily to a search engine. Our behaviors have begun to match up with that. We see that query length has gotten longer. We also see that it's getting longer in a specific way. There are a lot more questions being asked. And you can see this graph represents year over year growth. These trends have persisted for the last few years. When people are querying things, we see a lot of growth in the how does this work, or who is this person, or where can I go for some bit of information. People ask questions and they expect answers from the search engines to be similar to the way that we'd talk to another human. And the thing that's interesting is that starting around the same time as Hummingbird, we began seeing the incidence of these featured snippets. So featured snippets are Hummingbird's effort to answer those questions. Now imagine this. We see in this search result that when I say how to open a checking account, it says that there are 10,500,000 results. However, we also see that there's a featured snippet. That means that the search engine feels confident that from amongst those 10.5 million results, it has one result or one statement from amongst those results that it thinks it can answer that question correctly. You can do this with things like, how tall is the Statue of Liberty? Or how far away is the moon? Things like that that have a known value. So where the search engine feels confident that it has a known value or a known answer, it will attempt to answer it with a featured snippet. So we also know that the people also ask box represents other featured snippets. So here, Hummingbird is not just taking a guess at what the correct answer to your question is, but it's also saying, here are other things that I understand to be related to the question that you asked. So the entity of checking account exists within a relationship map to things like free checking accounts and how to open a checking account and how to start your own bank. Maybe that's a little far off, but either way, there's some other questions that it perceives as being highly related to them. As we know, feature snippets, they show up in 3 different types: short answers, lists, and tables. It's really interesting to see the proliferation of feature snippets and what it implies about the search engine's willingness to answer questions that it thinks it knows. Feature snippets are not generated only by the first result. Some people will look at that and say, oh, that's just a summary of the first result. That's not true. It actually can be taken from any of the top 10 results, that it would be the first page results on a search engine result page. Highly weighted to the first, second, and third, obviously, but it can be technically taken from any portion of the top 10 results. It isn't the first paragraph. It isn't the last paragraph. It could be somewhere in the middle of any piece of content on that first page. This has had a pretty significant impact on the click-through rates. So if you can imagine, in a world where we ask questions a lot more and the search engine is just providing us answers, what compelling reason do we have to actually go and visit the page? So we can actually see some of this result here. On the left-hand side is mobile devices, and on the right-hand side are desktop devices. The gray areas represent where there is no click on the page. There's no click-through to a page. The orange represents the paid clicks, that is, somebody clicks on a paid ad, and the blue represents when they click on an organic result. So you can see, paid click-through rates are quite small, but that generates, tens of dozens of billions of dollars for the search engines. But on mobile devices, where the screen that you get to on a search engine result page after you ask a question has a feature snippet on it or a SERP feature, you tend not to click on it. So it is a significant change in terms of the competitive landscape where these feature snippets are. And guess what? They are a lot of places. So this represents the time frame sort of when featured snippets became went from test mode to launch mode. So you can see that sort of in the February 2016 to March 2016 time frame, a big jump, and that continues to grow still. So more and more search queries are resulting in feature snippets as the search engine becomes more and more confident that it can answer the questions correctly. Here's another graph just to kind of show you the similar sort of thing, that it's not just a sampling error. Indeed, we see feature snippets becoming quite prolific over that period. So here's why you want to pay attention to feature snippets and what they represent as an opportunity. One, as mobile searches become more and more prominent, as they outpace desktop searches, you can imagine that the feature snippet takes up more of that screen real estate. So if you are have a lot of users that are on mobile devices and you've been ranking pretty well, guess what? If feature snippets start showing up in words that you rank for, it's possible that you won't even be visible, quote unquote, on the screen anymore, because the feature snippet's going to take up a lot of that screen space. The other is that feature snippets currently are what is delivered to many voice queries. So when you ask your Google Home or your Alexa, your personal assistant, how far is it to the moon, or how tall is the Eiffel Tower, or what actor or actress was in, whatever movie. It's just reading featured snippets. So you can actually run the same query on a desktop or mobile, and you will probably see the same result show up in a feature snippet as what the personal assistant is going to say. So currently, most of these personal assistants are just purely reading featured snippets when they're providing those kinds of informational results. And, it makes sense as to why they do that, because you're asking a question, so question format, that's highly related to feature snippets. You're looking for a short answer, feature snippets, they're just a couple of sentences or a list or a table. They want something you want an authoritative answer, right? So as a user, you want to say, how far is the moon? Well, tell me the right answer. Well, the search engine has high degree of confidence that they actually have the answer for it, and they're algorithmically generated. So that is, doesn't have to be somebody sitting there answering for you. The search engine can just search amongst pages and say that it has a high degree of confidence that the answer is correct. So very interesting, and pay attention to these aspects. They're enabled by some of the recent changes in search algorithm updates.